London, the 7th May 1866. The marriage settlement lay open between Miss Enid Chetwynd and Samuel Sackville, Duke of Norchester, with a pen waiting beside the final page, as if the matter had already been decided. Enid had been engaged to him for 18 days. In all that time, Samuel had never spoken foolishly, never made a promise he could not measure, and never once told her that he loved her. Until that morning, she had persuaded herself that restraint was not the same as indifference. Havisham House was quiet for a May morning. Beyond the study windows, carriage wheels passed along the Mayfair street. Inside, the only sound was paper turning beneath Enid's gloved fingertips. Samuel stood opposite her, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his attention fixed on the document rather than on the woman expected to sign it. "Mr. Sloane has reviewed the trust provisions," Enid said. "My solicitor found them cautious, but not unreasonable." Samuel inclined his head. That was the intention. She turned another page. Her father had taught her never to sign anything, merely because a gentleman sounded certain. The brass pocket compass he had carried for 20 years rested in the hidden pocket of her skirt. She could feel its weight against her palm through the fabric. "Choose your course." Enid reached the paragraph concerning voting authority within Chetwynd and Company and read it a second time. The clause did more than preserve her property through trustees. It appeared to grant the Sackville interest influence over commercial votes that she had never discussed with Samuel. This provision wasn't in the earlier summary. Samuel looked down. "Which provision?" She indicated the paragraph. "The one that allows your estate representatives to exercise influence over Chetwynd voting rights after our marriage." His eyes followed the lines. For a moment, something changed in his face. Then discipline covered it. The final wording came through Burdett's office. "I asked that the settlement protect both interests." Protect them from what? Instability. The answer was sensible and cold enough to tighten her chest. Through the partly open inner door, a clerk crossed the adjoining records room carrying a folio. Mr. Ernest Burdett stood beyond him near a cabinet, sorting papers. He glanced toward the study only once before the clerk pulled the door nearer to its frame. Enid noticed the movement and dismissed it. Men of business hovered near important papers every day. She returned her attention to Samuel. "I understand why your estate needs commercial stability." "Then you understand why the marriage is advantageous." "Advantageous." Enid repeated the word softly. "Suitable, sensible, mutually beneficial." Samuel had chosen her because she understood accounts, because Chetwynd and Company controlled warehouse house and freight contracts along the Thames, because she would not bring frivolous debts or romantic demands into his life. Society might consider the daughter of a man from trade fortunate to be noticed by a duke. Enid had not needed Norchester's title. What she had wanted, against her better judgment, was the man beneath it. She closed the settlement halfway. Samuel's attention lifted. "Is something wrong?" "I need one answer before I sign." "Ask it." Enid slipped one hand into her skirt pocket and closed her fingers around the compass. The brass was cool. She drew it out beneath the edge of the table and held it in her palm. Her father had never chosen a husband or business decision for her. He had expected her to listen, think, and live with her own course. She looked at Samuel steadily. "Did you ever want me?" He went still. "Enid, not Chetwynd Capital, not the warehouses, not the security of combining your estate interests with mine. Me." The room seemed to contract around the question. Samuel's jaw tightened with the discomfort of a man presented with a language he had spent years refusing to speak. We agreed from the beginning that this engagement was practical. We agreed that neither of us wanted foolishness. Yes, that wasn't the same as agreeing there would never be affection. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Enid saw calculation enter his eyes, and something inside her quietly gave way. He was searching for the correct answer as he might search for the correct figure in a ledger. "I won't lie to you," he said. "Then don't." His hand left the chair. "I engaged you for business, not love." The words did not arrive loudly. They did not need to. For one humiliating instant, she remembered every restrained kindness she had misread. The way he had listened when she spoke about river freight, the rare moments when his mouth had almost softened into a smile. She had built hope from scraps he had never intended as promises. Her fingers closed around the compass until its edge pressed into her skin. She did not cry. Samuel took one step forward. "Enid, I thought you understood. I do now. This marriage would give you complete social protection. Your interests would be secured." "My interests." She opened her hand, looked once at the compass, then returned it to her pocket. She set the settlement flat again and picked up the pen. Samuel's shoulders eased slightly, as though he believed the difficult moment had passed. Enid placed the pen horizontally across the unsigned signature line. "Then you require a partner in an account, Your Grace." "Not a wife." Silence followed. Samuel's face lost its careful certainty. "What are you saying?" "That I won't sign. Because I told you the truth. Because the truth has finally made the choice simple." He stared at her. "You would end the engagement over this. I would end it because I refuse to enter a marriage in which I am useful before I am human." "I didn't say you were nothing more than useful." "No, you merely told me usefulness was why you chose me." He moved as if to speak again, then stopped. Enid watched the restraint settle over him. He did not take her arm. He did not place himself between her and the door. For the first time that morning, he gave her something she had not needed to ask for: the freedom to leave. She gathered her gloves. "My solicitor will write regarding any business discussions that should continue separately." Samuel's voice was lower. "Enid, don't decide this in anger." "I'm not angry." She met his eyes. "That's why you should believe me." She left the settlement where it lay. A footman opened the front door, and within minutes her carriage had carried her away from Havisham House with the unsigned papers still behind her. Samuel remained in the study after the sound of wheels vanished. He had negotiated land purchases with hostile trustees and faced creditors who mistook rank for weakness. None had left him feeling as though the room had been emptied of air. Near noon, Burdett appeared at the study door. "Your Grace!" Samuel looked at the settlement. "Not now." Burdett hesitated. "Of course." He withdrew. Samuel sat and read the document from the first page. This time he read each provision as though Enid were still standing across from him. By the time a servant entered that afternoon with a sealed letter from Miss Chetwynd, he had reached the voting clause again. The letter was brief and formal. Enid ended the engagement without accusation, demanded nothing, and asked that no announcement be made in her name. Samuel read it twice. Then he returned to the settlement and compared the paragraph to the written instructions he remembered giving Burdett. His eyes narrowed. The wording was not his, and for the first time since Enid had walked out, Samuel understood that the business bargain he had defended might contain a deception he had never ordered. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Samuel had discovered that one sentence in a marriage settlement could be more dangerous than an entire page of debt. The original document remained exactly where Enid had left it until he returned to the study after breakfast. Her signature line was still empty. The pen she had placed across it had been removed by a servant. But nothing else had been disturbed. Samuel closed the study door, unlocked the shallow drawer of his desk, and took out the written instructions he had sent to Ernest Burdett. Before the final settlement was drafted, he read them once, then again. The difference was not subtle when one knew where to look. Samuel had authorized provisions designed to keep Sackville estate liabilities separate from Chetwynd commercial assets and to ensure that Enid's property remained properly settled through trustees after marriage. He had not instructed anyone to create a mechanism by which Sackville representatives might influence votes within Chetwynd and Company. Yet the final paragraph did exactly that, wrapped in language sufficiently cautious to appear protective at first glance. Samuel placed both sets of papers side by side. He disliked anger because anger weakened judgment. What he felt now was colder. He pulled the bell. His household secretary appeared within minutes. "Send for Mr. Burdett and bring me the announcement list, prepared for the engagement." The secretary hesitated. "The notices intended for later this week, Your Grace?" "All of them." "Yes, Your Grace." Samuel waited until the door closed, then took Enid's letter from beneath a paperweight. He had read it twice the previous afternoon. He read it a third time now. There was no plea hidden between the lines, no demand for apology, no threat of public embarrassment. She had simply ended the engagement and requested that nothing be announced in her name. The restraint of it unsettled him more than anger would have done. Anger might have invited argument. Her calmness left him nothing to fight except the consequences of his own words. Burdett arrived before 10. He was a neat, composed man of 45 whose usefulness had always rested on his ability to make difficult figures sound manageable. He entered carrying a narrow portfolio and bowed. "You wished to see me, Your Grace?" Samuel indicated the chair opposite him, but did not invite Burdett to sit. "I want you to explain this clause." Burdett leaned over the settlement. His eyes moved quickly across the paragraph. "The voting provision? I didn't authorize it." Burdett straightened. "Not in those exact words. No, not in any words. Your Grace instructed me to secure the Sackville interest against instability after the marriage. I instructed you to protect estate liabilities. I didn't instruct you to reach into Miss Chetwynd's company." Burdett's expression remained respectful. "The distinction is less clear in practice than it appears on paper." "It appears perfectly clear on paper." A brief silence followed. Burdett folded his hands behind his back. "The provision was intended as practical language, Your Grace." Nothing more. Samuel watched him. Practical for whom? For both parties. Miss Chetwynd's fortune is substantial, but much of her wealth remains tied to trade. Your estates provide standing and long-term security. A marriage joining the two requires some mechanism for coordinated decisions. Coordinated decisions require agreement. This paragraph gives influence without requiring hers. Burdett paused before answering. It was a small hesitation, but Samuel noticed it. If Miss Chetwynd objected, the wording could have been amended. She shouldn't have needed to discover it at the signing table. Burdett's gaze lowered to the page. "No, Your Grace." The secretary returned, carrying a packet tied with cream ribbon. Samuel took it and broke the seal. Inside were drafts prepared for family correspondence, several private notices, and a list of households to be informed before any wider announcement. Lady Pauline Kenyon's name appeared near the top. Samuel closed the packet. "Nothing leaves this house." Burdett looked up. "Your Grace, the engagement is ended." The first genuine change crossed Burdett's face. "Ended? Miss Chetwynd has withdrawn." Burdett recovered quickly. "I see. Do you? The timing is unfortunate." Samuel's voice sharpened. "For whom? For the estate?" That answer came too quickly. Samuel leaned back. "Explain." Burdett opened his portfolio and removed a memorandum. "There are obligations falling due before midsummer. Repairs at Havisham Park, 2 mortgage renewals, outstanding river, improvements, and several advances already committed on the expectation that the Chetwynd alliance would strengthen our position." Samuel held out his hand. Burdett gave him the paper. "You told me the estate could meet present obligations until autumn. Under ordinary circumstances. These are ordinary obligations, not when several converge." Samuel read the figures. The totals were uncomfortable, but not catastrophic. One expected receipt from tenant arrears appeared. 2 planned dividends did not. He looked toward Burdett. "Where are the canal shares?" Burdett blinked. "Your Grace, the June dividend from the Western holding. It may be delayed. Maybe there has been uncertainty." "Since when?" "Recently." Samuel's eyes returned to the memorandum. He remembered discussing that dividend less than a fortnight earlier. Burdett had called it dependable. Now it had vanished from a summary intended to prove immediate danger that did not establish fraud. It established a question. Samuel had learned long ago that questions became expensive when ignored. "Bring me the estate ledger this afternoon." "Which ledger?" "The black Morocco volume containing river expenses and investment receipts for the last 2 years. Burdett was silent for half a beat. "Of course." Samuel folded the memorandum. "And no one is to describe Miss Chetwynd as having broken an obligation to this family. She signed nothing. She owes us nothing." Burdett's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Society may draw its own conclusion. Society may do what it likes. My household will not help it." He turned to the secretary. "Write to every person on this list. The proposed engagement announcement is withdrawn. No explanation, no speculation, and no statement is to be made in Miss Chetwynd's name unless she approves the wording herself." "Yes, Your Grace." Burdett cleared his throat. "May I speak plainly?" "You generally do when you think plainness will frighten someone." The adviser accepted the rebuke. "Without the marriage, Your Grace, the estate cannot tolerate months of uncertainty." Samuel looked at him. "Then we'll discover whether the uncertainty is real." For the first time, Burdett did not have an immediate answer. After he left, Samuel placed the unsigned settlement inside his black dispatch box, together with his original written instructions. He locked it himself and slipped the key into his waistcoat pocket. Enid had walked out, believing he had treated her future as a business solution. He could not dispute that, but he could prevent his household from turning her refusal into a public offense. And he could discover why a clause he had never ordered had appeared in the document she had been expected to sign. He took her cancellation letter once more and read the final sentence. "Please make no announcement on my behalf." Samuel set it down carefully. Outside, London continued as if nothing had changed. Carriages rolled through Mayfair. Calling cards were delivered. Invitations moved from house to house, carrying news faster than truth ever travelled. By evening, the cancelled announcement had already become a question in several drawing rooms. Samuel did not yet know what answer society would invent. He knew only that someone had altered the settlement. Someone had made the estate's position appear more desperate than he remembered. And before the week was over, Enid Chetwynd would learn that private words did not always remain private. By the evening of the 10th May, Enid Chetwynd had learned that London society could turn a private wound into entertainment before the candles were fully lit. She had accepted Lady Wrexham's dinner invitation because refusing every engagement after the broken betrothal would look like shame, and Enid had no intention of teaching anyone that she possessed it. The dining room in Mayfair glowed beneath gaslight and crystal. Silver laid in measured ranks across a table, long enough to keep enemies politely separated. Enid sat midway down, neither honored nor hidden. She preferred it that way. Samuel Sackville, Duke of Norchester, had arrived 10 minutes after her and taken his place farther up the table. They had exchanged the proper acknowledgement due between acquaintances who had once expected to marry. Nothing more. Enid had not seen him since leaving Havisham House. She had noticed, however, that no engagement announcement had appeared. No newspaper paragraph had named her. No servant had delivered a message supposedly written on her behalf. Samuel had obeyed the request in her letter. It was a small thing, perhaps, but small things had become difficult to dismiss. Lady Pauline Kenyon sat opposite Enid 2 places down, elegant in dark, violet silk, and the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years mastering insults that could survive repetition in polite company. Samuel's widowed paternal aunt had never openly objected to Enid during the engagement. She had merely asked careful questions about trade, warehouse odors, and whether women raised among commercial men found aristocratic households terribly quiet. Enid had answered everyone. Halfway through the second course, Lady Pauline laid down her fork and turned toward Lady Wrexham. I've always thought misunderstandings occur when practical negotiations are mistaken for declarations of devotion. The conversation nearest them softened, not stopped. Society rarely stopped. It simply learned to listen while pretending otherwise. Lady Wrexham gave a cautious smile. Surely clarity prevents misunderstanding. One would hope so. Pauline's gaze moved toward Enid, though clarity can disappoint those who expected sentiment where only business was intended. Enid felt the words before she understood why. Across the table, Samuel's attention sharpened. Pauline continued with delicate regret. A gentleman may say quite plainly that affection was never part of an arrangement, yet somehow the lady still feels injured when she hears it. Enid's fingers remained steady around the stem of her water glass. The room did not know the exact sentence Samuel had spoken. Pauline did. That changed everything. Samuel had not told her. Enid knew that with a certainty she could not explain logically and did not need to. If he had meant to humiliate her, he would not have suppressed the announcement. More importantly, the words had been spoken in his study with no guest present. The adjoining records room, Mr. Burdett. The thought arrived quickly, but evidence had not. Enid kept it where it belonged, inside her mind. Pauline tilted her head. Perhaps some women simply find it difficult to distinguish between being valued and being useful. Samuel set down his wineglass. The sound was quiet, yet several people looked toward him. Aunt. Pauline's smile did not move. Yes, Samuel. His voice was controlled. You are discussing Miss Chetwynd. Am I? I hadn't named anyone. You didn't need to. Lady Wrexham shifted uneasily. Enid saw the hostess preparing to rescue the table with a change of subject. Samuel did not allow it. He looked first at Pauline, then at the guests who had suddenly found great interest in their plates. Since implication has already done the work of accusation, the facts may as well be spoken plainly. Enid's breath caught despite herself. Samuel's gaze found hers. He did not ask permission with words, but he paused. Enid understood the question in that silence. Would she object if he spoke? She gave the smallest nod. Samuel turned back to the table. I proposed the engagement to Miss Chetwynd. She did not pursue me, pressure me, or seek advantage through my title. I asked her to marry me. Pauline's face hardened by a degree. Samuel continued. The engagement ended because of my conduct. Miss Chetwynd had every right to end it. Someone near the foot of the table inhaled softly. Enid felt every eye move toward her now. It would have been easy to let Samuel carry the entire burden. Easier still to appear grateful and silent while a duke restored what another aristocrat had damaged. She could not do it. Protection that required her disappearance was merely another version of being managed. Enid placed her glass down. His Grace is correct about one thing. Her voice was calm enough that she did not need to raise it. I was the one who ended the engagement. Pauline's brows lifted. Then perhaps you'll forgive society for wondering why. Society may wonder whatever entertains it. A few mouths tightened against smiles. Enid kept her attention on Pauline. But I didn't leave because I failed to obtain a title. I left because no title was worth surrendering my dignity to keep. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one, no longer hungry. Now it was uncomfortable. Pauline leaned back. Dignity is a rather dramatic word for a private disappointment, only to someone who wasn't disappointed. Samuel's expression changed, not amusement. Something quieter, edged with respect. Pauline turned to him as though expecting support. She did not receive it. Samuel said, Miss Chetwynd owes no defense beyond that. Of course you would say so now, Pauline replied. The entire situation reflects badly on the family. Then let it reflect on me. The words landed without ornament. I'm the one who created it. Enid looked at him fully then. This was not the man in the study, explaining advantage and stability as though human feeling were a nuisance clause. He had just placed his own reputation between her and an insult. He could easily have allowed society to blame on her. It did not heal what he had said. It did not erase why she had left, but it mattered. Dinner moved on because dinners always did. Lady Wrexham asked about an opera subscription. A gentleman near Samuel introduced a discussion of Parliament. Pauline became exquisitely silent. Enid finished the meal without trembling. Only after the ladies rose did she realize one of her calling cards had slipped from the small case in her reticule and fallen beside the chair. She bent at the same moment. Samuel stepped around the end of the table to retrieve it. Their gloved fingers touched over the cream card. The contact lasted scarcely a second, yet both stopped. Enid became aware of the warmth of his hand even through kid leather, of how near his shoulder was, of the fact that Samuel seemed as startled by the small collision as she was. His eyes lifted to hers. Neither moved immediately. Then Samuel withdrew first. Forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. He picked up the card and held it out rather than placing it into her hand. Enid accepted it, careful this time not to touch him again. The distance restored between them felt strangely deliberate. In the drawing room afterward, conversation separated into smaller groups. Samuel approached only when Enid stood near the doorway with her wrap being brought from the hall. He kept a respectful distance. May I ask you something? You may ask. I've begun examining the estate accounts. Enid studied him. Because of the clause. because of the clause, and because several figures no longer fit the story I was given. He did not lower his voice conspiratorially. He simply spoke quietly enough for privacy. I would value your judgment. As what? Samuel understood the question at once. As the controlling principal of Chetwynd and Company, not as my former fiancée. Something in Enid's chest eased, though she did not let it soften her answer. Mr. Sloane attends. Of course. And no one interprets the meeting as reconciliation. No one will. She considered him for a moment. Then send the figures to my solicitor. Samuel inclined his head. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. For the first time that evening, the corner of his mouth almost moved. I'll remember that. Her carriage was called. Enid stepped into the Mayfair night with her calling, card secured inside her reticule, and Samuel's public admission still echoing behind her. She had not forgiven him. She did not know whether she ever would. But she knew two things she had not known that morning. Someone had carried private words out of Havisham House, and the Duke of Norchester was no longer willing to let her stand alone beneath them. On the morning of the 11th May, Enid returned to Havisham House, under conditions she had chosen herself. Mr. Sloane arrived in the same carriage, carrying a leather portfolio, and the expression of a solicitor who expected facts to behave better than people. Samuel received them in the smaller morning room rather than the study where the engagement had ended. Enid noticed the choice immediately. The unsigned settlement was nowhere in sight, nor was the pen. A long table had been cleared for account books, correspondence, and memoranda. A maid brought tea, then withdrew to the adjoining room with the door left open. Samuel did not approach Enid until Mr. Sloane had taken his seat. Thank you for coming. I came to examine figures, Enid replied. Nothing more. I understand. She studied him, searching for resistance. There was none, and no one in this house is to interpret my presence as reconciliation. They won't. That includes your aunt. Samuel's expression tightened slightly, especially my aunt. Mr. Sloane removed his spectacles from their case. Then, perhaps we may proceed before society finds a way to invoice us for the morning. Enid almost smiled. Samuel did. It was brief, but it altered his face enough to remind her how dangerous small warmth could become if she allowed herself to mistake it for more than it was. Ernest Burdett entered, carrying the black Morocco estate ledger. Samuel had requested 2 days earlier. The volume was large, its corners rubbed from years of use. Burdett placed it in front of Samuel rather than Enid. The river accounts, Your Grace. Samuel did not open it. Miss Chetwynd requested the review. Burdett's gaze moved to her, naturally. Then address your explanations to her as the controlling principal of Chetwynd and Company, not as the lady involved in my former engagement. The correction was calm. That made it sharper. Burdett bowed. Of course, Your Grace. Enid said nothing, but Samuel's choice registered. He had not praised her intelligence in a drawing room. He had required a man in his employ to recognize her authority where it actually mattered. Mr. Sloane opened his portfolio. We should begin with the obligations Mr. Burdett described as urgent. Burdett produced a memorandum similar to the one Samuel had seen on the 8th May. Mortgage renewals, repairs, river improvements, advances, expected payments. Enid read the first page, then the second. Numbers alone rarely lied. People decided which numbers deserved to be seen. Where is the detailed support for river improvements? She asked. Burdett indicated the ledger. Beginning in the second half of last year. Enid drew the book toward herself. The entries were written in a compact hand, each expenditure assigned a date and category. She began with the most recent quarter and worked backward. Samuel sat opposite her. Mr. Sloane remained at her right, making notes. Burdett stood near the mantel, as though the room belonged to him only when no one questioned it. "These amounts repeat," Enid said after several minutes. Burdett answered, "Maintenance often does. Amounts may repeat. Descriptions should not repeat so conveniently." She touched one line with the blunt end of a pencil. River improvement, then river improvement again 6 weeks later, then a third payment under the same heading. Different works. Where? Along various properties tied to the estate. Which properties? Burdett hesitated. "I would need the supporting invoices." "Yes," Enid said. "You would." Samuel's attention remained on her. She turned 3 pages. "There is another problem." Burdett exhaled softly. "What problem?" "Your urgency memorandum treats these expenses as if they stand alone, but the estate receives income from the same commercial corridor. Where are those receipts reflected? Elsewhere in the accounts. Not in the summary you gave His Grace. The summary concerned liabilities. A summary intended to demonstrate danger cannot omit income that offsets the danger without, becoming misleading." Burdett's mouth thinned. "With respect, Miss Chetwynd, estate finance is not identical to warehousing." Samuel's voice entered before Enid could answer. No one suggested it was. Burdett inclined his head. "I merely mean that commercial instincts do not always translate to landed obligations." Enid closed the ledger halfway. "Arithmetic translates remarkably well." Mr. Sloane coughed into his hand, hiding what might have been amusement. Samuel did not bother to hide his. "Continue," he said. Enid reopened the volume. She moved through the entries more slowly now. Several payments clustered around river-related work, each large enough to matter, but small enough to escape immediate alarm. She copied dates onto a sheet. "Do you remember," Samuel said, "the concern you raised at Lady Wrexham's dinner?" Enid looked up. "I raised several." "You said the clause in the settlement was not merely protective because it gave influence without requiring your agreement." "Yes, this feels similar." Burdett shifted. Samuel continued before Enid could respond. "The figures are not false on their face. The danger lies in what they permit someone to conclude when information is omitted." Enid stared at him for a moment. She had made that distinction once, in anger, across a dinner-table conversation that Samuel had no reason to remember precisely. Yet he had remembered not only the point, but its structure. "That is exactly the concern," she said. Their eyes held for one quiet second longer than necessary. No warmth passed between their hands, no distance closed. Still, something changed. Samuel had listened. Not as a duke tolerating a clever woman, not as a man attempting to win back a fiancée. He had listened because he believed her reasoning deserved to remain in his mind. Enid broke the moment by returning to the ledger. "Then we should test whether the same pattern appears elsewhere." They worked for nearly 2 hours. By midday, 3 irregularities had emerged. The first was the repeated river improvement category. The second was the omission of certain expected receipts from Burdett's urgency summaries. The third was subtler. Several payments had been routed through an intermediary rather than directly to contractors. The name meant nothing to Samuel or Mr. Sloane. Enid recognized only the form of it. "This looks like a freight intermediary rather than an estate contractor." Burdett answered too quickly. "Many firms conduct several kinds of business. Then we should discover which kind this one conducts for you." Burdett's irritation finally showed. "Miss Chetwynd, I fail to see why the internal arrangements of the Sackville estate should become an extension of your commercial inquiries. Samuel closed the memorandum in front of him because I asked for her judgment. Your Grace, that may be unwise given recent circumstances. The room cooled. Enid expected Samuel to defend the decision by invoking rank. Instead, he said, Miss Chetwynd's judgment does not become less sound because I behaved badly toward her. Burdett looked at him, then away. As you wish. It is not a wish. Samuel's tone remained level. It is the arrangement under which this review continues. Burdett bowed stiffly. When he left to retrieve supporting papers, Enid watched the door close behind him. He resents this, mister, Sloane replied. Men who are accustomed to being trusted often resent questions more than accusations. Samuel looked toward the black ledger. He has had my trust for years, Enid said. Then do not withdraw it, merely because we found irregularities. Verify them. Samuel nodded. Proof before judgment. Exactly. He reached for one of the sheets she had covered in figures, then stopped short of taking it. May I? Enid slid the paper across the table herself. You may. He studied her column of dates. You marked the same intermediary beside 4 entries. Because I want to know whether Chetwynd freight records ever touched the same name. Samuel looked up. Can you determine that? Yes. How soon? Not from memory. She gathered her notes. I will need access to our Rotherhithe records. Then I'll send copies of these entries to Mr. Sloane. Not the ledger. No, the ledger stays here. His answer came without hesitation. Enid glanced at the black Morocco volume, then at him. Good. For once, there was no argument between them about control. There was only a boundary, clearly stated and accepted. As Mr. Sloane closed his portfolio, Samuel said, If the intermediary appears in your freight accounts, I want to know. Enid fastened her gloves. You will. He inclined his head. Not because you owe me. No. She met his gaze. Because I want to know too. Outside, the carriage waited to take her back through London. Behind her, the black Morocco ledger remained under Sackville custody at Havisham House, exactly where it belonged. Ahead of her lay the Chetwynd records near the Thames and a name that might prove meaningless. Or it might explain why a financial crisis had begun to look less like misfortune and more like design. On the 15th of May, the Thames smelled of tar, wet rope, coal smoke, and money. Samuel knew the last of those only because Enid had once told him that prosperous trade rarely smelled like polished mahogany. By 10:30, his carriage had carried him from Mayfair to Rotherhithe, where Chetwynd and Company occupied a broad riverside yard of warehouses, counting rooms, loading sheds, and offices, connected by stone passages worn smooth beneath decades of boots. Enid waited beneath the awning of the main warehouse with her companion, Mrs. Vale, at her side, and a clerk holding a sheaf of freight records behind them. She wore a dark blue walking dress, practical enough for the river district, with no ornament beyond a narrow brooch at her collar. Nothing about her suggested a woman playing at commerce for amusement. Men stopped to greet her because they expected decisions. Your Grace, she said as Samuel approached, Miss Chetwynd. Her expression was composed. Mr. Sloane sent the dates from the Sackville entries. The black ledger remained at Havisham House, as agreed. Good. I thought you would approve. I am learning to appreciate being told where things belong. A faint amusement touched her eyes, then disappeared. That sounds almost like progress. I'll accept almost. The clerk opened the first record book on a standing desk. Enid pointed to 4 dates copied from the Sackville accounts. The intermediary appears here under the name Harker and Bell. They arrange freight space for several smaller concerns that do not maintain their own river contracts. Samuel leaned closer, careful not to crowd her. Do they work for Chetwynd directly? Occasionally. Never enough to explain the sums in your estate ledger. She turned a page. These are our payments to them, modest, irregular, mostly emergency carriage and overflow storage. Then Burdett's entries are larger, much larger. Samuel looked at the columns. Could the firm have another legitimate arrangement with Sackville Properties? Of course. That is why we're here, rather than accusing anyone. She glanced toward him. Proof before judgment. He remembered the phrase from Havisham House. I haven't forgotten. No, she said quietly. You seem not to forget figures once they matter to you. The remark should have been nothing. Yet Samuel heard the edge beneath it. He had remembered her reasoning. He had failed to understand her heart. The distinction sat between them until a foreman approached with a cap in his hands. Miss Chetwynd, may I trouble you? Enid turned at once. What is it, Mr. Price? It's Daniel Moss's wages. The office deducted 2 days from last week. He says he was here. 1 day, yes. The other, he was sent upriver with a damaged consignment. Enid looked toward the clerk. Who entered the absence? Mr. Bellamy, miss. He may not have had the river note. Then Mr. Moss is owed both days. Yes, miss. Correct it before wages are distributed, and send Mr. Bellamy the river note so the error isn't repeated. The foreman hesitated. Shall I tell Moss you ordered it restored? Enid shook her head. Tell him the record was wrong and has been corrected. He doesn't need gratitude for being paid what he earned. Samuel watched the man leave. No speech had accompanied the decision. No theatrical generosity. Enid had simply identified an injustice and repaired it. He had spent years among people who treated charity as performance and fairness as an optional virtue. She appeared to see no distinction between good management and moral obligation. You are staring, she said. Samuel looked back at her. I'm observing. That is a more ducal word for it. Would you prefer staring? At least it would be honest. He almost smiled. Then I was staring. Her mouth softened before she turned away. The moment was small, but it stayed with him as they moved into the packing shed. There, bales and wooden crates stood beneath high windows filmed with river dust. Enid spoke with 2 merchants about delayed unloading, then questioned a warehouse supervisor about a disputed invoice. Samuel listened rather than intervening. Once, a merchant glanced toward him, as though expecting the Duke to settle the matter. Samuel deliberately said nothing. Enid settled it herself. They were crossing beside a stack of bound canvas when a loose packing cord caught against Enid's glove. She drew her hand back sharply. Are you hurt? Samuel asked. Hardly. She removed the glove and examined the base of her right palm. A shallow scrape had opened where the coarse fiber had dragged across the skin. It was slight, but Samuel saw a thin line of red. His instinct was immediate. So was the memory of what she had told him at Lady Wrexham's dinner and again at Havisham House. Do not decide for me. He stopped himself before reaching for her. May I see? Enid looked at him. Something in her expression changed when she realized he was waiting. Then she held out her hand. You may. Samuel took it carefully. Her bare palm rested against his fingers, warm and unexpectedly delicate, despite the competence with which she had spent the morning directing men twice her size. He turned her hand only enough to see the scrape. It's shallow. I told you. Mrs. Vale had already asked a nearby clerk for clean linen and water. Samuel took the folded strip only after Enid kept her hand where it was. May I? He asked again. Yes. He wrapped the linen once around the base of her palm and tied it securely without tightening it. The task required little time. He found himself wishing, absurdly, that it required more. When the knot was finished, he released her at once. Enid flexed her fingers. Competent. High praise. Do not become vain, Your Grace. It was a piece of linen. Then I'll treasure the distinction privately. Her smile appeared fully this time, brief but real. Samuel felt the loss of it when she turned back toward the office. Later, in the counting room, Enid spread several Chetwynd freight books across a long desk, while Mrs. Vale sat near the window with correspondence. They confirmed Harker and Bell had received ordinary commercial payments from Chetwynd and Company, but none matched the scale or frequency of the amounts recorded under Sackville river improvements. One reference, however, caught Enid's attention. Here, she tapped a notation. They arranged storage for a contractor who also handled estate, stone, and timber. Samuel bent over the entry. So the connection is possible. Possible, not explained. And Burdett's payments may still be legitimate. Yes, she closed the book. You sound disappointed. I am disappointed by uncertainty. That, I believe. He looked toward her bandaged hand resting beside the ledger. You prefer certainty. I prefer choices made with enough truth to deserve the name. Enid was silent for a moment. Then she reached into the hidden pocket of her skirt and drew out a small brass compass. Samuel recognized the shape from the morning the engagement ended. Though he had not seen it clearly then, the case was worn smooth along one edge. My father carried this for years, she said. She opened it and turned the inside toward him. Beneath the compass face, 3 words had been engraved. Choose your course. He gave it to me when I began attending company meetings. How old were you? 22. Did he tell you which course to choose? Never. She looked at the compass rather than at Samuel. That was the lesson. He could advise me. He could warn me. He could tell me when he believed I was making a mistake. But he never mistook loving me for owning my decisions. The words were gentle. That made them harder to evade. Samuel understood what she was giving him, not forgiveness. A measure by which he had failed. May I? He asked. Enid placed the compass in his open palm. Samuel studied the engraving. The brass was warm from her hand. He sounds like a wise man. He was not always wise. No one is. He knew that too. Samuel closed the compass carefully and returned it to her. Their fingers did not touch. He made certain of that. Enid slipped it back into her pocket. Harker and Bell gives us a direction, she said, not an answer. Samuel looked at the freight books, then toward the window where the Thames moved beyond the warehouses under a pale afternoon sky. Burdett insisted the marriage was necessary because the estate could not tolerate delay. Yes, but if some of those liabilities were exaggerated or routed through an intermediary for another purpose, then the marriage may have been solving, a crisis I did not fully understand. Enid's face became still, or a crisis someone needed you to believe was worse than it was. Samuel held her gaze. The thought was no longer merely uncomfortable. It was dangerous, because if Burdett had manipulated the estate accounts, then the altered settlement clause had not been an isolated piece of practical language. It might have been part of a design that required Enid's money, Enid's company, and Samuel's willingness to treat marriage as a transaction. By 18th May, Samuel had stopped asking whether Ernest Burdett's figures were merely careless, and begun asking what kind of man benefited when a duke was kept frightened enough to act quickly. The black Morocco estate ledger remained at Havisham House, locked in the financial room when not under examination. And that afternoon it lay open again on the long table in the smaller morning room. Enid sat beside Mr. Sloane with 3 sheets of copied figures arranged before her. The shallow scrape at the base of her right palm had faded to a narrow healing line beneath a fresh strip of linen. It no longer hurt unless she bent her hand sharply, and she did not mention it. Samuel noticed anyway. He also noticed that he had begun noticing such things without deciding what should be done about them. That, he suspected, was a different habit from the one he had spent 36 years cultivating. Burdett stood near the window with a memorandum in hand. "The missing receipts are not missing, Your Grace. They were simply excluded from the immediate liability summary, because they were not guaranteed to arrive before the obligations fell due." Enid looked down at the dates. The Western Holding dividend was described as dependable less than a fortnight before the engagement ended. Burdett's mouth tightened. Circumstances altered. What circumstances? Market uncertainty. Mr. Sloane adjusted his spectacles. "Do you have correspondence showing that uncertainty?" "Not with me," Samuel said. "Then bring it." Burdett turned toward him. "Your Grace, if every preliminary estimate must now be defended as though it were an accusation, the estate office will spend more time producing explanations than managing property." Samuel rested one hand on the table. "You told me delay could place the estate in serious difficulty. It can. Then explaining the basis of that judgment is management." Burdett glanced toward Enid. "Miss Chetwynd's commercial experience is considerable, but landed property is governed by different pressures." Enid did not rise to the slight. She tapped the second column on her page. Different pressures do not change subtraction. Samuel looked at the memorandum again. 2 receipts that should have offset part of the so-called urgent liabilities had been omitted entirely. A third had been discounted so severely that it might as well not have existed. None of that proved Burdett had stolen a shilling. It did prove that Samuel had been shown the estate at its weakest possible angle. "What about the river payments?" he asked. Burdett answered, "Contractors, storage, transport, repairs. Through Harker and Bell, in some cases." Enid said, "Chetwynd records show them as freight intermediaries. Their ordinary charges are nowhere near the sums entered here." Burdett's expression sharpened. "Your records are not our contracts." "No," she said, "which is why I am not calling the payments improper. I am saying the difference deserves explanation." Samuel watched Burdett receive that answer. Irritation passed across the advisor's face before deference covered it again. Samuel had trusted the man for years, because Burdett spoke with the confidence of someone who appeared to know where every uncertainty belonged. Now Enid was exposing how easily confidence could become a curtain. "Bring the supporting invoices and the correspondence concerning the Western dividend," Samuel said. "Tomorrow." Burdett bowed. "As you wish, as I require." Burdett gathered his memorandum and left. The door remained open after him. A maid was visible in the adjoining room arranging fresh tea, and Mr. Sloane continued comparing dates at the far end of the table. Enid waited until Burdett's footsteps had faded. "He knows you no longer take his summaries on trust. He is observant, so are you." Samuel looked at her. "You sound surprised." "I am revising several judgments. About Burdett, not only Burdett." The quiet answer rested between them. Samuel did not ask which judgments concerned him. He had learned enough to know that a question could become pressure merely because a duke expected an answer. Mr. Sloane cleared his throat and slid a page toward Enid. "Here, The June dividend appears in the full account, but not in either urgency summary. Enid compared the figures, and the tenant arrears receipt is reduced twice. Samuel came around the table, stopping across from her rather than beside her. How much difference does it make? Not enough to make the estate comfortable. Enid added the figures carefully, enough to make it less desperate than Burdett presented it. So the crisis may be exaggerated. Maybe. We still need the invoices and correspondence. Samuel nodded. Proof before judgment. Enid's eyes lifted. You have become irritatingly disciplined about repeating that. I had an exacting teacher. You had one conversation. It was memorable. Her expression softened despite herself. Mr. Sloane concealed another small smile behind his hand and announced that he needed 10 minutes in the library to consult a reference volume. He left the room with the door standing open. The maid remained within sight beyond it. Samuel and Enid were, for the first time since the morning at Rotherhithe, close enough to speak without business immediately between every sentence. Enid flexed her right hand and winced almost imperceptibly. Samuel saw it. He did not reach for her. Still tender, he asked. She looked at the linen. Only when I forget it is there. I am trying to learn from that sentence. About injuries? About not assuming every problem improves because I put my hand on it. A surprised laugh escaped her. It was quiet, warm, and entirely unplanned. Samuel stared. Was that amusement at my expense? Entirely. Then I am glad I could be useful. Careful. You may begin to think usefulness is enough. The laughter vanished from both of them, but not the warmth. Samuel lowered his gaze to the figures. My father thought feeling excused consequences. Enid became still. What do you mean? He had not intended to say it. Perhaps that was why he continued. He was generous, charming, and incapable of refusing an impulse if it pleased him in the moment. He pledged money before knowing whether he had it. He promised improvements to tenants, investments to friends, support to relations. Then someone else had to make the promises possible. You. Eventually. Samuel looked toward the window. By the time I inherited, I had spent years watching affection become obligation, and obligation become debt. I decided anything permanent should be measurable before it was trusted. Enid listened without interrupting. Marriage included, she said, especially marriage. So you believed calculation was the opposite of irresponsibility? Yes, and perhaps it is, in an account. He looked back at her. Not in a life. Enid folded her hands carefully, protecting the healing scrape without making a point of it. Your father let feeling escape responsibility. You learned to use responsibility to escape feeling. They are not the same mistake, Samuel, but they can wound people from opposite directions. It was the first time she had used his given name since ending the engagement. Neither of them acknowledged it. Samuel felt the sound of it more sharply than he wanted to. You understand me remarkably well for a woman who has every reason not to. Understanding is not the same as excusing. I know. Do you? He met her eyes. I am beginning to. The room remained quiet, except for the faint clink of china from the adjoining space. Enid could have gathered her papers then. Business was finished for the afternoon. Instead, she stayed. Samuel did not mistake that choice for forgiveness. He simply allowed himself to be grateful for the extra minutes. For what it is worth, he said, I am dreadful at conversations I cannot prepare for. Enid's mouth curved. I had noticed. That was cruel. That was accurate. Worse. She laughed again, and this time Samuel did too. The sound felt unfamiliar in Havisham House, where most rooms had been designed for dignity rather than ease. When Mr. Sloane returned, he found them once more studying figures. But the silence had changed. Before Enid left, Samuel placed Burdett's latest urgency summary beside the full account and looked at the omitted income one final time. Someone made the estate appear closer to crisis than it was. Enid fastened her glove carefully over the healing hand. Yes, the question is why? No, she said. The question is who profits if you believe there is no time to think. Samuel watched her depart with Mr. Sloane. A moment later, from the corridor, he saw Burdett standing at the far end with a bundle of correspondence in his hands. The advisor's gaze moved from Samuel to the closed morning room door and back again. He said nothing. He did not need to. For the first time, Samuel understood that Burdett had noticed something too. His duke was no longer listening only to him. On the evening of the 21st of May, Enid understood why Lady Pauline Kenyon had been so determined that she attend the charity subscription gathering. The invitation had been written in an elegant hand and phrased as though Enid's presence were a matter of civic importance. The room itself was respectable, crowded, and carefully chosen. Merchants with old fortunes stood beside titled families with older names. Committee patrons moved between tables arranged with subscription lists, correspondence, and neatly folded reports. It was exactly the sort of place where a private insult could become a public fact if repeated with sufficient confidence. Enid arrived with Mrs. Vale and found Samuel already there. He stood near one of the tall windows, speaking with a trustee from a charitable school, his black evening coat severe against the warm glow of the lamps. He saw Enid almost immediately. His attention paused on her. Then, on the faint healing line at the base of her right palm, where the packing cord had scraped her 6 days earlier. He said nothing about it. That silence mattered. He had asked once. She had answered. He did not turn care into surveillance. Lady Pauline approached before Samuel could cross the room. "Miss Chetwynd," she said, "how good of you to come. You made the invitation difficult to refuse. I had hoped you would understand its importance. I suspect I am about to." Pauline's smile was almost affectionate. "You always were perceptive." A small circle had already formed nearby. Lady Wrexham was present, as were 2 committee patrons. A banker's wife, Enid, new through Chetwynd business, and 3 gentlemen whose names appeared frequently in commercial subscription lists. Enid recognized the arrangement for what it was. Pauline did not want gossip. She wanted witnesses. "Since we are among people concerned with charitable stewardship," Pauline began, "perhaps clarity is useful." Samuel had reached the edge of the group. His expression changed when Pauline produced a folded sheet from her reticule. Enid's heartbeat sharpened. The paper was not the original settlement. She knew that at once. The original remained locked in Samuel's dispatch box at Havisham House. This was a copy, written in another hand. Pauline unfolded it with deliberate care. "There has been unfortunate speculation regarding the end of my nephew's engagement. I dislike speculation. Facts are kinder." "Are they?" Enid asked. Pauline's eyes glittered. "Usually." She read a portion of the copied clause concerning Sackville influence over Chetwynd voting rights, omitting the surrounding provisions that would have shown how unusual the paragraph was. Then she lowered the paper. One might reasonably conclude that Miss Chetwynd expected to secure a coronet through commercial advantage, only to discover the arrangement was less sentimental than she hoped. The circle went still. Samuel stepped forward. "That paper is not the original settlement." Pauline turned. "I never said it was. Where did you get it?" Must we turn a social evening into an interrogation? You brought a private legal clause into a public room, a clause that concerns the reputation of this family. Enid watched Pauline carefully. The wording was too precise to have come from gossip. Burdett's office had handled the final draft. Someone from that office had given Pauline enough to make the attack appear authoritative without revealing the source. Enid did not yet know whether Burdett himself had handed it to her or whether it had traveled through another person. She knew only that the leak had narrowed. Pauline turned back to Enid. Surely you understand why people wonder whether disappointment, rather than principle, ended the engagement. His Grace was very plain that the arrangement was practical. Perhaps you simply objected when you learned he would not pretend affection. The cruelty was quiet. That made it more effective. Several people in the circle lowered their eyes. Others looked directly at Enid, waiting to see whether she would break. She felt the old wound open, but not in the same place. On the 7th of May, Samuel's words had made her feel foolish for hoping. Tonight, Pauline wanted her to feel ashamed for having hoped at all. Enid refused the gift. "You are correct about one thing," she said. His Grace was plain. Pauline's smile returned. Enid continued. "He told me what the engagement meant to him. I believed him. Then I chose. You chose to leave." "Yes, and abandon a match most women in England would consider extraordinary. That is precisely the point." Enid's voice remained calm. "I walked away from rank, access, and security because a woman who signs herself away after being told she is merely useful has helped write her own humiliation." No one moved. Pauline's face hardened. "That is a dramatic interpretation of a practical settlement." "No, it is a practical interpretation of my own life." Samuel spoke then, and the words Lady Pauline is referring to were mine. Every face turned toward him. He did not look at Pauline. He looked at Enid. "I said them. Miss Chetwynd did not invent insult where none existed. I gave her reason to leave." Pauline's voice sharpened. "Samuel, you are allowing her to make the family appear culpable for a private disappointment." "I am making myself culpable for my own conduct." "You owe no public confession." "Perhaps not." She was given no choice about the public humiliation. That silenced Pauline for a beat. Samuel turned to the others. Miss Chetwynd did not attempt to purchase rank. She left before signing the settlement. She accepted no title, no financial advantage, and no social bargain from me. Pauline lifted the copied clause. Then why was this provision drafted at all? Samuel's gaze moved to the page. "That is a question I intend to answer." Something in his tone changed the room. Not outrage. Certainty. Enid saw Pauline recognize the danger too. The paper in her hand had been meant to shame Enid. Instead, it had connected the social attack to the unexplained drafting of the settlement. Pauline folded it quickly. "I have said all I intended." "Then I hope," Enid replied, "you will remember that intention when the source of your copy is examined." Pauline looked at her sharply. Enid did not press further. Proof before judgment. Samuel had learned the phrase. So had she. The gathering resumed with the strained determination of polite society, refusing to admit it had witnessed cruelty. Enid remained for another 20 minutes, because leaving immediately would give Pauline the appearance of having driven her out. She signed the charity subscription for the amount she had planned before arriving. Spoke with 2 committee members about warehouse apprenticeships, and only then asked Mrs. Vale for her wrap. Samuel approached near the corridor. "Do you wish me to remain with you?" Enid studied him. He did not say he would escort her. He did not assume. For a little while, she said. He inclined his head. They moved into a small withdrawing room adjacent to the main salon. The door remained open. Mrs. Vale settled in a chair just beyond the threshold where propriety required, close enough to be seen, but far enough to allow quiet conversation. Enid stood near a side table and removed one glove, flexing her nearly healed right hand. Samuel remained several feet away. "I am sorry," he said, "not for Pauline, for what made her attack possible." Enid looked at him. "You did not give her that paper." "No. I believe you." The words affected him more than she expected. His shoulders lowered slightly. "I cannot undo what I made possible," he said. "I can only become a man who would not do it again." Enid felt the sincerity of the sentence and the danger of how much she wanted to believe it. Samuel extended one hand, palm upward, but did not move closer. "May I?" She looked at his hand, then at his face. There was no claim in the gesture, no demand for forgiveness, only an offer. Enid placed her bare hand in his. Samuel closed his fingers gently around hers. The contact was warm, steady, and more intimate than the brief touch over the fallen calling card or the careful bandaging at Rotherhithe. He did not stroke her skin. He did not pull her nearer. He simply held on because she had chosen to let him. For several quiet minutes, neither spoke. Enid felt her breathing settle when Samuel's thumb shifted once against the side of her hand. He stopped, as though checking whether the movement was welcome. She answered by tightening her fingers around his eyes lifted to hers. Something unguarded passed across his face, so brief that another woman might have missed it. Enid did not. "You may stay a little longer," she said softly. "I would like that." Outside the open door, voices continued beneath the lamps. Inside, they remained hand in hand until Enid chose to let go. The moment ended because she ended it. And Samuel accepted that too. Before she left, he said, "The copy Pauline had could only have come from the drafting side of the settlement. Burdett's office. Yes. Do not accuse him yet." Samuel's mouth tightened. "I know. Do you?" He looked at her, then gave the faintest hint of a smile. Proof before judgment. Enid drew on her glove. "Good." The following morning, before the memory of his hand had fully left hers, a sealed creditor's letter arrived at Chetwynd and Company. It contained figures no outsider should have possessed. The creditor's letter reached Enid before breakfast on the 22nd of May, and by the time she finished reading it, she knew the attack had moved beyond drawing rooms. The seal belonged to Mr. Henry Wainwright, whose firm supplied timber, iron fittings, and warehouse materials to Chetwynd and Company on quarterly terms. He was not a nervous man. He was also not given to gossip that made the figures in his letter more alarming. He referred to a projected shortfall tied to the collapsed Sackville alliance, mentioned liabilities that had never been published, and requested reassurance that several outstanding accounts would be honored without delay. Enid read the page twice. Mrs. Vale watched from across the breakfast table. "Is it serious?" "It is designed to look serious." Enid folded the letter. "Mr. Wainwright knows numbers he should not know." "From your company?" "Some, and some from the Sackville side." The combination was the problem. Someone had selected enough truth from both concerns to create the appearance that Enid's broken engagement had left Chetwynd and Company exposed. It was not a complete picture that made it more dangerous, not less. Selective truth traveled well because it sounded responsible. By 10 o'clock, Enid had sent for her chief clerk, requested the current receivables schedule, and written to 2 customers whose payments were due before the end of the month. She also sent a note to Mr. Sloane, asking him to attend a meeting with Wainwright the following morning. She did not send for Samuel. That choice lasted until noon, when Samuel arrived at her London residence with a message from his banker already moving ahead of him. Mrs. Vale received him in the drawing room. Enid entered with Wainwright's letter in her hand. Samuel stood when she appeared. "You know, I know enough to be concerned." "How?" "One of my estate correspondents mentioned that a creditor had begun asking questions about Chetwynd obligations." His expression was controlled, but she could see the strain beneath it. "I came as soon as I learned." "You might have written." "I thought this was too important for a note." "That depends what you came to say." Samuel glanced toward Mrs. Vale, who remained seated near the window with her embroidery. He lowered his voice slightly. "My banker is prepared to guarantee the disputed accounts until this is resolved." Enid became very still. "Prepared? Yes. At whose request?" Samuel hesitated. That was answer enough. "Yours, Enid. Listen to me." "I am listening. If Wainwright believes there is risk, others may follow. A temporary guarantee stops panic before it spreads." "And when did you intend to ask? Whether I wanted your guarantee?" "I intended to discuss it with you now, after arranging it, only provisionally." "That does not make it less arranged." Samuel took a breath. "I was trying to protect you." The words were sincere. They were also exactly wrong. Enid placed Wainwright's letter on the table between them. "Kindness performed over my head is still a form of control." Samuel's face changed. "That was not my intention." "I know. Then surely intent matters. It matters to whether I believe you meant to insult me. It does not change what you did." He looked toward the letter. "You could face a run of demands if the rumor spreads." "Then I will answer them." "With what?" Enid's eyes sharpened. "With my company's money, its receivables, its contracts, and its reputation. The same things I would have used if I had never met you." Samuel fell silent. She continued, quieter now. "Do you understand why this matters? Because you will not be rescued." "No, because I will not be made dependent in order to prove that you care." The sentence struck him. Enid saw it. For a moment, Samuel looked as though he might defend himself again. Instead, his shoulders lowered. "You are right." She had not expected the admission so quickly. "Samuel, no." He shook his head once. "You are right. I made the decision first and intended to ask permission afterward." "Yes, which means I did exactly what you have been warning me not to do." Enid said nothing. Samuel crossed to the writing table, but stopped before touching anything. "May I use your paper?" "Yes." He wrote a brief note to his banker, sanded it, folded it, and sealed it with the ring on his hand. "The guarantee is withdrawn." Enid watched him place the letter on the tray for the footman. Immediately. And if I fail? The question cost her more than she wanted him to know. Samuel met her eyes. "Then if you ask for help, I will give it. If you do not ask, I will respect the answer." Something in her chest loosened. Not because he had solved anything, because he had stopped trying to solve her. The following morning, Enid met Mr. Wainwright in the counting room at Chetwynd and Company, with Mr. Sloane, her chief clerk, and Mrs. Vale present nearby. Samuel did not attend. He had not asked to. Enid appreciated that almost as much as she resented having to appreciate it. Wainwright was a broad, graying man, with careful manners and the discomfort of someone who disliked appearing distrustful. "Miss Chetwynd, I hope you understand that my letter was not intended as an accusation." "I do. You have accounts outstanding and employees to pay. You would be careless not to ask questions." He relaxed slightly. "There have been reports. Reports are not accounts." She slid the receivables schedule toward him. These payments are due within 12 days. These contracts are current. These warehouse obligations are covered. The failed engagement has not transferred any Sackville liability to Chetwynd and company because no marriage settlement was signed and no merger of interests occurred. Wainwright examined the papers. Mr. Sloane confirmed the legal separation in 2 concise sentences. Enid did not dramatize. She did not offer a duke's name as collateral. She showed the work. "I am willing," Wainwright said after several minutes, "to extend the disputed invoices by 30 days while these rumors settle." 15. He looked surprised. "You prefer less time?" "I prefer not to purchase confidence with a concession I do not need." A reluctant smile touched his mouth. 15, then. They shook hands formally. By noon, the arrangement was written and witnessed. The crisis had not vanished, but it had been contained without Samuel's money. Later that afternoon, a sealed note from Havisham House arrived. It contained no apology dressed as explanation. Samuel wrote only that he had withdrawn the guarantee before it took effect, that he had instructed no banker or agent to act for Enid again with her express request, and that he had obtained one piece of information he thought she should have. The leaked figures in Wainwright's letter had been arranged in the same peculiar sequence used in Burdett's internal urgency summaries. Samuel did not call it proof. He called it a pattern. Enid read the line twice. Then she went to Havisham House with Mr. Sloane on the 24th of May. The black Morocco ledger remained in its proper place under Sackville custody. Samuel met them in the morning room and handed over copies of Burdett's summaries without touching Enid's papers. "You were right to refuse me," he said before business began. "You have already apologized. I am not repeating it to obtain forgiveness." His voice was steady. "I am saying it because I need to remember what I did wrong." Enid looked at him. "Then remember this part too. I did not refuse because I wanted to prove I could suffer alone." "I know. Do you? You refused because the choice had to remain yours." "Yes," Samuel nodded. "Then from now on, I will give you information before I give you solutions." It was not a declaration. It was not a touch. It was better suited to the fragile trust between them than either would have been. They turned to the copied figures. Enid compared Wainwright's letter with Burdett's urgency summary, line by line. The same order appeared. River obligations first, projected shortfalls second, expected receipts omitted or diminished. The formatting was distinctive enough to matter. "Who normally sees these summaries?" she asked. Samuel's expression hardened. "Burdett, myself, occasionally my secretary. Trustees receive fuller accounts. And the combined Chetwynd figures, only after the engagement negotiations began." Mr. Sloane leaned closer. Then, whoever prepared the leak had access to both the estate summary and the settlement discussions. Enid looked at Samuel. Neither spoke Burdett's name immediately. They did not need to. Suspicion was no longer broad. It had narrowed to a door they could almost see through. But almost was not enough. Samuel drew the copied summary toward him and said, "We still need proof." Enid nodded. "Then that is what we find." On the morning of the 25th May, Enid found her name printed beneath a column of respectable insinuations. The newspaper never accused her directly of purchasing rank. It did something more effective. It wondered whether certain commercial families had lately become too ambitious in their efforts to enter aristocratic circles. Whether broken engagements sometimes sealed disappointed financial expectations and whether society should distinguish generosity from calculation when large fortunes moved close to noble houses. Chetwynd and Company was not named, nor was the Duke of Norchester, yet the references were precise enough that anyone who had attended Lady Pauline Kenyon's charity gathering would understand exactly whom the writer meant. Enid folded the paper once and laid it beside her breakfast plate. Her right palm had healed fully now. Only a faint line remained where the packing cord had scraped it, and even that was beginning to disappear. Mrs. Vale watched her carefully. "Will you answer it?" "Not in print." "Then how?" Enid looked toward the sealed envelope that had arrived with the newspaper. The charitable committee on which she had served for 3 years requested her presence that afternoon. The note was polite, almost apologetic. That told her everything. "Apparently, I am to be answered for elsewhere." The committee met in a sober drawing room near Cavendish Square, where 12 women and 4 gentlemen oversaw subscriptions for apprenticeships, widows' relief, and employment placements. Enid had helped organize the warehouse apprenticeship fund since before Samuel ever entered her life. She arrived with Mrs. Vale and Mr. Sloane, who waited outside the committee chamber unless legal clarification became necessary. Lady Pauline was already there. Of course she was. She sat near the chairman, dressed in dove grey and wearing concern like a jewel. "Miss Chetwynd," said Mrs. Harbury, the committee chairwoman, "thank you for coming." "You asked me to." Enid took the chair offered to her. "May I know the concern?" Mrs. Harbury exchanged a glance with another patron. Pauline supplied the answer. "The concern is not personal. Those are often the most personal words in England." A few committee members shifted in their seats. Pauline's expression remained composed. "There has been public speculation. This charity depends upon confidence from subscribers. Some fear that association with recent scandal may distract from the work." "Association with me, you mean?" "Temporarily." "And what would you have me do?" Mrs. Harbury spoke quickly. "No final decision has been made. One suggestion was that you might withdraw from active committee duties until the matter settles." Enid heard the kindness in the wording. She also heard what lay beneath it. Disappear quietly. Make everyone comfortable. Allow rumor to become verdict without ever requiring anyone to defend it openly. She placed both gloved hands in her lap. "No?" Pauline blinked. Mrs. Harbury leaned forward. "Miss Chetwynd, perhaps you misunderstand. This would not be a judgment upon your character. Then there is no reason for me to resign. It may protect the charity." "From what?" No one answered immediately. Enid continued. 3 years ago, this committee had 12 apprenticeship placements and insufficient subscriptions to fund half of them. Last year, we placed 41 young men with warehouse, printing, and shipping concerns. Chetwynd and Company funded 6 places and arranged 11 more through our commercial partners. Those are facts. If my conduct here has been improper, say so and remove me. If it has not, then asking me to disappear because a newspaper printed insinuations is not protection. It is surrender. Pauline's voice sharpened. You cannot expect charitable patrons to ignore public feeling. I expect them to judge the work entrusted to them rather than reward gossip. The article did not appear from nowhere. No, neither did the private clause you displayed 4 nights ago. Silence spread across the room. Pauline stiffened. I do not see how that is relevant. It is relevant because someone has been feeding private financial information into public suspicion. Enid did not accuse her of arranging the newspaper column. She did not know that. If this committee wishes to remove me, it should do so because of something I have done, not because someone has made my name convenient. Mrs. Harbury looked down at the reports before her. One of the male trustees, Mr. Lawson, cleared his throat. I have reviewed Miss Chetwynd's work. There is no complaint concerning her conduct. Another woman nodded. Nor mine. Pauline's face became colder. You may regret making principle out of pride. Enid looked at her steadily. Perhaps, but it will be my regret. The vote, when it came, was not dramatic. That was what made it satisfying. 11 members favored retaining Enid without restriction. 3 abstained. Pauline did not vote because she was present only as an advisory patron. Enid remained exactly where she had been before society attempted to move her. Samuel learned of the committee result that evening, but he did not hear it from Enid. Mr. Sloane brought him something else first. At Havisham House, the Black Morocco estate ledger remained under Sackville custody in the financial room, and Samuel had spent the afternoon comparing copied memoranda rather than moving the original volume unnecessarily. On the table lay Burdett's urgency summaries, the figures from Wainwright's letter copied with permission, and several internal notes prepared during the engagement negotiations. The same sequence appeared again and again. River obligations first, projected shortfall second, expected income pushed lower, commercial exposure arranged last. It was not merely similar information. It was a habit of presentation. Burdett's format, Samuel said. Mr. Sloane adjusted his spectacles. It appears so. Appears. Yes, Your Grace. Samuel disliked the word because it was honest, not proof. No. The solicitor tapped one copied sheet, but enough to narrow the source considerably. Whoever leaked the figures had access to the internal summaries and to Chetwynd information from the settlement discussions. Samuel looked toward the closed door. Burdett. Likely. Likely is still not proof. Miss Chetwynd has trained you well. Samuel gave him a dry look. You are becoming too comfortable in this house. Mr. Sloane almost smiled. A professional hazard. Later, when Enid arrived with Mrs. Vale to review the committee's correspondence and the newest financial pattern, Samuel expected anger. Instead, she looked tired, not defeated. Tired. That distinction mattered. They asked you to resign, he said. They suggested I withdraw temporarily. And you refused. Yes. Good. Enid removed her gloves. Do not congratulate me too quickly. I was frightened. Samuel looked at her. You did not appear frightened. That has never been the same thing. He heard the truth beneath the sentence. The committee had retained her, but the cost of standing alone before respectable judgment had not vanished because she won. I wanted to come, he said, to the committee. Yes. Why didn't you? Because you did not ask me. Enid became still. Samuel continued. I thought about arriving anyway. Then I realized that would have turned your defense into my intervention. So I stayed away. Something softened in her expression. Thank you. Do not thank me for learning slowly. I was thanking you for learning at all. He looked down at the copied financial summaries. I am afraid of becoming a man who always decides what is best for you and then calls it care. Enid's gaze lifted to his. This was not the controlled confession about his father. It was more immediate, more vulnerable, because it named what he feared he might still become. Then ask me, she said. Samuel did not move. Ask you what? What you want to do before you do it. He understood. The room seemed suddenly quieter. Mrs. Vale sat in the adjoining space with correspondence, the door open between them. Samuel took one step closer, then stopped well short of Enid. May I hold you? Her breath changed. He saw it, but he did not interpret it for her. He waited. Enid looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the remaining distance herself. Yes. Samuel opened his arms only when she stepped into them. Enid rested her cheek against his chest and felt his breath catch before his arms settled around her carefully. There was no urgency in the embrace, no attempt to claim more than she had offered. He simply held her, one hand between her shoulder blades, the other resting lightly at her upper arm. Enid closed her eyes. The safety of the moment frightened her more than the committee had, not because Samuel was dangerous, but because she wanted to trust what this had become. After a few seconds, she tightened her arms around him. Samuel exhaled against her hair. I nearly came today. I know, I nearly decided you needed me. I know that too, and I am glad I didn't. Enid drew back just enough to look at him. So am I. He did not release her until she moved first. When they separated, the distance between them no longer felt cold. Samuel turned toward the papers. The leak pattern points strongly toward Burdett, but we still cannot prove the commission or the reason behind the altered figures. Enid nodded. Then we do not confront him yet. Agreed. At that moment, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Mr. Sloane entered, carrying a narrow sheet of copied account references. His expression had changed. I believe I found the sequence that tells us where the unexplained commission went. On the 29th of May, the first piece of proof arrived not as a confession, but as a sequence of numbers that refused to remain accidental. Mr. Sloane spread his copied account references across the long table at Havisham House, while Samuel, Enid, and one of the Sackville trustees examined them in silence. The Black Morocco estate ledger remained under Sackville custody and had been brought from the financial room only for the witnessed review. Nothing else had moved. The original unsigned marriage settlement was still locked inside Samuel's dispatch box. Mr. Sloane tapped 4 entries in the ledger, then 4 corresponding references from Chetwynd freight records. The payments do not go directly to Harker and Bell, he said. They pass through a warehouse broker first. Enid leaned closer. Which broker? Mr. Sloane turned the sheet. Meriton and Frost. Samuel knew the name faintly. Commercial brokers near the river. Yes, they arrange storage concessions and contract transfers. Enid traced the dates with one finger, and every large Sackville payment reaches them shortly before Harker and Bell receives a smaller amount. The trustee frowned. Meaning the difference stays with Meriton and Frost? Possibly, Mr. Sloane said, or passes elsewhere. We still need the correspondence explaining why the payments were authorized. Samuel closed his hand around the back of a chair. He wanted Burdett summoned immediately. The desire was almost physical in its force. For weeks, the man had answered questions with composure, corrected facts only when pressed, and watched Enid endure consequences created by information from his office. Samuel looked at her. I could have him here within the hour. Enid met his gaze. And ask him what? Why he routed estate money through a warehouse broker. He will say it was ordinary administration. Then I will ask about the altered settlement. And he will say the language was practical. Samuel's jaw tightened. You are enjoying this less than you sound. Much less. Her voice softened. But anger is not evidence. He looked away. She was right, again. He was beginning to understand that discipline felt very different when imposed upon oneself. The trustee turned another page. If there was a commission, there should be correspondence. Someone had to instruct the broker. Samuel looked toward the shelves of retained estate letters. Then we find it. The search took most 2 days, because they did not tear through the Sackville records like desperate people hunting a miracle. Correspondence was brought in ordered bundles. Mr. Sloane and the trustee recorded what was examined. Samuel's secretary produced the river contract files, then the estate investment letters, then the broker communications retained from the previous year. Enid reviewed only the commercial references relevant to the pattern. She did not pretend expertise where she had none. Samuel found himself watching that too. She never enlarged her authority merely because she had been proved right before. On the afternoon of the 31 May, Mr. Sloane opened a packet tied with faded green tape and stopped. "Your Grace." Samuel crossed the room. Inside lay routine correspondence from Meriton and Frost concerning warehouse access, transport concessions, and contractor payments. The third letter contained nothing unusual. The fourth did. It was not written by Burdett, but attached to it was a signed instruction in his hand. Samuel recognized the signature immediately. Mr. Sloane did not allow him to take the page until the trustee had read the heading and date aloud. Only then was the document placed flat on the table between them. The instruction directed Meriton and Frost to retain a commission from a series of estate payments before forwarding the remainder through Harker and Bell. The stated purpose was advisory facilitation. The amount was larger than any reasonable clerical fee. More damningly, a private notation beneath the instruction directed that a portion be credited against an obligation associated with Ernest Burdett personally. Samuel read the line twice. The room became very quiet. Enid stood opposite him, her expression no longer doubtful. "That is the commission." "Yes." Samuel's voice was flat. "Mr. Sloane said, and it explains why the river payments were inflated." The trustee added, "It also gives Mr. Burdett a personal reason to make the estate appear more pressed for funds than it was. Continued payments protected his own position." Samuel looked at the signed instruction. So much became clear at once. The urgency summaries, the omitted income, the pressure to conclude the marriage quickly, the voting provision inserted into the settlement. Enid's capital had not merely been useful to the dukedom. It had been useful to a man who needed fresh liquidity and broader access before scrutiny reached his accounts. "He used my fear of instability," Samuel said. Enid answered quietly, "And my company." Samuel's anger returned, but this time it had somewhere precise to go. "I am going to confront him." "Not alone." Samuel looked at her. "You think I cannot control myself?" "I think a private confrontation gives him room to deny, destroy context, and later claim you acted from wounded pride." Mr. Sloane nodded. "Miss Chetwynd is correct." Samuel gave him a look. "You are becoming fond of saying that. Professional integrity requires sacrifice." Enid almost smiled, but her attention remained on Samuel. "The accusation against me was made publicly. Pauline displayed that copied clause before people who now believe I tried to trade money for rank. If Burdett is exposed privately, Pauline can still call the rest a family dispute." Samuel understood where she was leading him. "You want witnesses. I want an accounting." Where? He could have chosen the estate office, the trustee's chamber, a solicitor's rooms. He did not. "Where do you want it?" Enid became still at the question. Weeks earlier he would have selected the place before asking whether she agreed. Now he waited. "Havisham House," she said. "The drawing room." Samuel lifted one eyebrow. "Not the study? No, that room belongs to too many private wounds already." He felt the truth of that. "Who attends?" "The trustees, Mr. Sloane, relevant business directors, people who heard Pauline's accusation." Pauline herself, and Burdett, especially Burdett. Samuel looked at the signed instruction again. He will know we have found something before the meeting, probably. Then he may prepare an explanation. Good. Enid's voice was calm. Let him prepare the best one he has. Truth should survive an explanation. Samuel stared at her, then gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. You make vengeance sound embarrassingly inefficient. It usually is, Mr. Sloane gathered the signed instruction and placed it with the trustee's record. The original would remain under witnessed control and pass to the solicitors after the reckoning. No one would carry it casually through London. No one would be able to claim it had appeared from nowhere. Samuel watched the document leave the table under proper custody, then turned to Enid. There is one more matter. What matter? The settlement. Her expression tightened, but he continued carefully. Not the original. That remains locked away. I mean the business arrangement between Sackville Interests and Chetwynd and Company. Whatever happens with Burdett, I do not want your company tied to whether you ever forgive me. Enid studied him. That sounds like a conversation for another day. It is. He paused. But I wanted you to know the decision is already clear in my mind. Your freedom cannot depend on my hopes. Something in her face softened. They stood on opposite sides of the table with the account sheets between them. All the old machinery of calculation still present. Yet for once, Samuel was using certainty to remove a claim rather than create one. Enid extended her hand across the table. Then we stand together at the accounting. Samuel looked at her hand before taking it. The clasp was brief, deliberate, and entirely mutual. No desperation, no promise beyond what she had offered. Still, her fingers tightened once around his before she let go. Together, he said. On the 1st of June, the invitations to the witnessed accounting began to leave Havisham House. Burdett would receive his, like every other man expected to attend. Samuel did not yet know what defense he would offer. He knew only that this time the truth would not be decided in whispers, and Enid would not be summoned afterward to hear what men had chosen on her behalf. On the 3rd June, 2 days before the witnessed accounting at Havisham House, Samuel asked Enid to meet him about the one matter he refused to carry into that room unfinished. Mr. Sloane attended, along with the Sackville trustee who had witnessed the discovery of Ernest Burdett's signed broker instruction. The original instruction remained under formal custody with the trustees and solicitors, exactly where it had been placed after the review. The black Morocco ledger remained in the financial room under Sackville control. The unsigned marriage settlement was still locked inside Samuel's dispatch box. None of those documents appeared on the morning room table. Instead, a new agreement lay there. Enid stopped when she saw it. Samuel stood on the opposite side of the table, but he did not reach for the paper. "This concerns Chetwynd and Company," she asked, "and the Sackville commercial interests that still require storage and freight arrangements. You said you wanted them separated from everything else." "I do." Mr. Sloane adjusted his spectacles. "The proposed agreement is commercial only. Ordinary negotiated terms, fixed duration, independent termination provisions, no marriage condition, no personal settlement attached." Enid looked at Samuel, and if I marry someone else, his expression did not change. The agreement remains. If I never marry, it remains. If I decide tomorrow that I never wish to speak to you outside a business meeting again, that answer took him half a second longer. It remains. Enid opened the document. The terms were almost aggressively ordinary. Storage rates, Freight priorities, notice periods, liability divisions, no voting authority, no implied estate influence over Chetwynd decisions, no clause that could turn a future marriage into a commercial lever. Her eyes moved back to him. You removed every personal advantage. Yes, even the ones that would have been easy to justify. Especially those. Mr. Sloane said, Miss Chetwynd's solicitor may still amend any provision she dislikes. Samuel nodded. Nothing is final until she approves it. Enid read the last page. Why now? Because Burdett wanted your capital and my urgency tied together. I will not let tomorrow's exposure leave any shadow, suggesting I still need your personal answer for the estate to function. You mean my answer about you? Yes. Samuel's voice lowered. Whatever happens between us, your freedom cannot carry a financial penalty. Enid looked down at the agreement again. Weeks earlier, Samuel had believed permanence became safe when every consequence could be calculated. Now he was using calculation to remove consequence from her refusal. The change was not romantic in any obvious way. No flowers had arrived. No speech had been rehearsed for society. Yet Enid felt the weight of it more deeply than any gesture designed to charm her. She turned to Mr. Sloane. Your opinion? Commercially sound. I would alter 2 notice provisions and clarify 1 indemnity, Samuel said. Then alter them. Enid glanced at him. You have not even heard which ones. If they protect your independence without creating unreasonable risk to either concern, I have no objection. Mr. Sloane looked mildly disappointed to have lost the opportunity for an argument. The revisions were made, read aloud, and initialed. By early afternoon, the commercial agreement stood apart from every personal question between Enid and Samuel. When the trustee and Mr. Sloane finally withdrew to arrange copies, the morning room door remained open. Mrs. Vale sat beyond it in the adjoining room, sorting correspondence. Enid remained by the table, one hand resting lightly beside the newly executed agreement. Samuel did not move closer. There is something else, he said. Business. No. Her heartbeat changed. Then say it carefully. I intend to. He took a breath, and for once the Duke of Norchester looked like a man who would have preferred a hostile creditor to the conversation in front of him. I am not asking you to restore our engagement. Enid searched his face. Good. I am not asking you to forget why you ended it. Better, and I am not asking you to treat the last weeks as proof that I have earned anything from you. She waited. Samuel looked at the open doorway, then back at her. I want to apologize without turning the apology into a bargain. His voice was quiet. I reduced your future to an instrument of estate policy. I told myself that honesty made it acceptable, because I had not promised affection I could not name. That was cowardice dressed as practicality. Enid did not interrupt. Then, when the consequences began to threaten you, I tried to protect you without permission. I arranged that guarantee because part of me still believed care meant preventing you from choosing risk for yourself. He held her gaze. I was wrong both times. I hurt you first by treating you as useful before human, then again by treating your independence as something I could suspend when frightened. Enid's throat tightened. He did not mention Burdett. He did not blame his father. He did not offer his good intentions as mitigation. What do you want from me now? She asked. Nothing you do not freely give. That is not an answer. No. A faint, rueful breath left him. It is me trying not to issue instructions while terrified. Despite herself, Enid almost smiled. You are terrified. Completely. You hide it well. Years of practice. The warmth between them lasted only a moment before Samuel continued. May I court you? Enid stared at him. Court me. Properly. You have already proposed marriage once. Yes. Badly. That is generous. I am attempting accuracy. She did smile then, and something in his face softened with relief. Samuel went on. I would like the chance to know you without negotiations attached, to visit when invited, to write if you permit it, to ask rather than assume. And if, after all of that, you decide, I am better suited to ledgers than husbands, the commercial agreement remains exactly as it is. You have considered that possibility at length, and I dislike it intensely. Enid looked toward the adjoining room. Mrs. Vale remained within sight, absorbed in her papers but unmistakably present. Propriety had not vanished merely because feeling had arrived. Enid turned back to Samuel. Yes, he went completely still. Yes, you may court me. The relief in his expression was so unguarded that Enid felt tenderness rise before she could defend against it. I had prepared several dignified responses in case you refused. And for this answer, nothing useful. That may be healthy for you. He laughed softly. The sound drew her one step closer before she realized she had moved. Samuel noticed. He did not follow. The restraint mattered. Enid, he said, may I ask one more thing? You may ask. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. May I kiss you? The room seemed to narrow around the question. There was no pressure in it. No claim that forgiveness required affection. No assumption that a courtship agreement entitled him to her body. Enid felt her pulse quicken, but the answer came without confusion. Yes. Samuel moved only after she spoke. Slowly. He stopped within reach, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Enid did not. Instead, she lifted her hand and touched his cheek first. The contact surprised him. She felt it in the slight catch of his breath. I said yes, she whispered. I know. Then stop looking as though you expect a solicitor to witness it. His mouth curved. Occupational damage. Enid closed part of the distance herself. Samuel bent toward her and kissed her gently. The first touch of his mouth was careful, almost restrained enough to be a question. Enid answered by keeping her hand against his cheek and leaning into him. Only then did the kiss deepen into something warmer, still tender, still controlled, but no longer uncertain. Samuel's hand settled lightly at her waist without pulling her closer than she had already chosen to stand. When they parted, neither moved far. Enid's fingers remained against his face for one quiet moment. Samuel looked at her as though the entire architecture of his life had shifted, and he had no intention of pretending otherwise. I have wanted to do that for longer than I should admit. Enid's mouth softened. Then perhaps it is fortunate you finally learned to ask. I am beginning to suspect that asking improves a great many things. Do not become smug about it. I would not dare. She lowered her hand, but did not step away immediately. Samuel did not say that he loved her. Enid was glad. Tomorrow's accounting still waited. Burdett had not yet answered before witnesses. Pauline had not yet retracted what she had spread. The truth was not complete, simply because tenderness had become real. Samuel seemed to understand that too. Tomorrow, he said, I will begin with my own part in what happened. Enid studied him. Not Burdett. No, him after. Why? Samuel looked toward the closed dispatch box on the far side of the room, where the unsigned settlement still remained locked away, because he exploited a transaction I created. Pauline weaponized it. But I was the first person who asked you to enter it. Enid's chest tightened again, differently this time. Then tomorrow, she said, tell the truth in the same order. Samuel nodded. I will. and for the first time since she had walked out of Havisham House, Enid believed not that Samuel wanted her back, but that he was finally becoming a man capable of loving her without needing possession to prove it. On the 5th of June, the drawing room at Havisham House held more truth than elegance could comfortably contain. Samuel had chosen the witnesses carefully, but Enid had chosen the principal. 2 Sackville trustees stood near the long centre table with Mr. Sloane and a solicitor representing the estate. 3 business directors had been invited because the disputed payments concerned commercial dealings. Lady Wrexham and 2 charitable patrons were present because they had heard Pauline's public insinuations. Lady Pauline Kenyon sat rigidly near the fireplace. Ernest Burdett stood beside the mantel with the composed expression of a man who still believed confidence might survive evidence. Enid entered with Mrs. Vale and took the chair offered to her. But Samuel did not begin until she had settled. The black morocco estate ledger had been brought from the financial room under trustee supervision and lay closed at one end of the table. Burdett's signed broker instruction remained in witnessed custody beside Mr. Sloane. Then Samuel crossed to the black dispatch box he had placed on a side table. He unlocked it himself. Enid recognized the original unsigned marriage settlement before he lifted it free. She had not seen those pages since the 7th May. They were intact. Her signature line remained empty. Samuel carried the document to the center table and placed it where everyone could see it. "Before we discuss Mr. Burdett," he said, "we will discuss me." Pauline stiffened. "Samuel, surely this is unnecessary." "It is necessary because Miss Chetwynd was accused publicly." His gaze moved across the room. "She was accused of attempting to purchase rank through money and marriage. This is the original settlement. She never signed it." Mr. Sloane stepped forward. "I can confirm that the document is the original reviewed after the engagement ended. Miss Chetwynd's signature does not appear anywhere upon it." Samuel looked at Enid, then back at the witnesses. She accepted no title, no transfer of financial advantage, and no completed personal settlement. She left the arrangement before society knew it existed. Pauline said, "That does not explain why such provisions were drafted." "No," Samuel replied, "this does." He indicated the disputed voting clause. Mr. Sloane opened his notes. His Grace's written instructions to Mr. Burdett directed separation of estate liabilities and protection of Miss Chetwynd's property through trustees. They did not authorize Sackville influence over voting rights within Chetwynd and Company. Samuel produced the original written instructions from the dispatch box and passed them first to the solicitor, then to the trustees. Burdett's composure altered for the first time. The clause was a practical extension of his Grace's intentions. Enid spoke from her chair. "You told us that on the 8th May. Burdett looked at her. "Because it remains true." "Then perhaps the accounts will support you," Samuel said. One trustee opened the black morocco ledger. The entries for river improvements were read aloud. Mr. Sloane then laid out the corresponding commercial records, showing payments routed through Meryton and Frost before smaller sums passed to Harker and Bell. Finally, the signed broker instruction was placed beside them. No one hurried. The power of the evidence lay in its sequence. Burdett's signature directed Meryton and Frost to retain a commission before forwarding the remainder. Beneath it, his private notation connected part of that retained money to an obligation associated with him personally. Burdett's face lost color. That was compensation for advisory work. "Paid from inflated estate charges?" one trustee asked. Administrative structures are rarely as simple as they appear. Then simplify this, Samuel said. Why did you omit expected income from urgency summaries while increasing the apparent pressure of river liabilities? Burdett's mouth tightened. Because the receipts were uncertain. And why did the creditor who pressured Chetwynd and Company receive figures arranged in the same peculiar sequence as your internal summaries? I cannot answer for gossip. You can answer for access. Silence followed. Samuel did not raise his voice. You knew the actual position of the estate. You knew the marriage negotiations gave you access to Chetwynd information. You altered the apparent urgency, inserted influence over Miss Chetwynd's company, and stood to benefit if new capital entered quickly. Burdett glanced toward Pauline. It was enough to make Enid look at her. Samuel followed the movement. There is one other matter, Aunt. Where did you obtain the copied clause you displayed on the 21st May? Pauline's face hardened. Mr. Burdett provided the wording. A murmur moved through the room. Burdett turned sharply. Lady Pauline requested clarification. I requested information concerning the family's reputation. Pauline snapped. You gave me the extract. Enid watched the alliance between social cruelty and financial self-interest collapse under the weight of each person trying to save himself. She rose. And then you used it to suggest I had attempted to buy what I had already refused. Pauline looked at her. I acted to protect the Sackville name. No, Enid said. You protected an idea of the Sackville name that required me to be ashamed of coming from trade while still welcoming the money that trade produced. No one interrupted her. You could believe me ambitious only if you ignored the simplest fact. I walked away. Pauline's mouth tightened. What do you expect from me? The truth, spoken before people who heard the lie. Pauline looked towards Samuel, perhaps expecting rescue from humiliation. He offered none. At last she said, Miss Chetwynd did not seek the engagement for rank or financial advantage. My implication that she did was unjustified. Enid held her gaze. And the clause? Pauline swallowed. I presented an extract without knowing the full circumstances of its drafting. Thank you. Enid sat again. Samuel turned to his aunt. From today, you will take no part in Sackville household announcements, financial discussions, or decisions made in this family's name. Pauline stared at him. You would exclude me over this woman? No, over your conduct. He then faced Burdett. Your employment ends today. The trustees will transfer all relevant records to the solicitors. They will pursue recovery of estate funds and whatever civil remedy the evidence supports. Burdett drew himself upright. My reputation will be destroyed before any court decides the matter. Samuel's expression remained cold. Your reputation rested on trust. The documents show what you did with it. Burdett left under the supervision of the estate solicitor, not as a prisoner, but as a man whose professional standing had ended in the room where he expected to control the explanation. The witnesses departed gradually. Before the original settlement left the house, the solicitor certified its unsigned and cancelled status and assumed custody of it for the archive. The black ledger and signed broker instruction went with the trustees and solicitors according to the record already established. When only Enid, Samuel, and Mrs. Vale remained, Samuel stood beside the empty center table. There is one more thing I must say. Enid looked at him. You have said a great deal today. Not enough. He glanced toward the doorway where Mrs. Vale remained within sight, then returned his attention to Enid. Mr. Burdett profited from treating Miss Chetwynd as capital. Lady Pauline punished her for refusing to behave like capital, but I was the first man here to tell her that was all I required her to be. Enid's breath caught. Samuel continued, quieter now. I cannot ask anyone else to answer for what I taught them was acceptable. Samuel, no. Let me finish without hiding behind rank. He crossed only half the distance between them. I love you, Enid, not for what you can secure, repair, inherit, or bring to my name. I love you, and if all you ever give me is the right to say it once, I will still be grateful. I learned truth. The room blurred for a moment, not because Enid was weak, but because she had waited so long to hear love spoken without a condition attached. She went to him by choice. Samuel did not move until she reached for his hand. Enid threaded her fingers through his and held them tightly. I love you too, Samuel. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened, nothing in them was hidden. Enid rested her forehead against his. He kept her hand in his and did not ask for more. I am not proposing today, he whispered. A soft laugh escaped her. That may be the wisest thing you've said all month. I intend to court you properly. Do you, if you permit it? Enid lifted her head and looked at him. Then ask me again when you are no longer surrounded by evidence. His mouth softened. I will. For once, he did not assume the answer, and for once, Enid found that uncertainty did not frighten her at all. 8 weeks after the reckoning at Havisham House, Samuel had discovered that proper courtship required more courage than negotiation ever had. There were no ledgers between them now, unless Enid chose to discuss business. The commercial agreement between Sackville Interests and Chetwynd and Company continued exactly as written, administered through ordinary channels and unaffected by whether Samuel visited her drawing room on Tuesday or waited until Thursday because she had work at the river. He sent flowers only once and learned, quickly, that Enid preferred books of shipping reports to extravagant arrangements, though she accepted one small bunch of white stocks because he had remembered. Her father used to grow them in a walled garden. He wrote when he had something to say. He called when invited. He asked before assuming. The change was not dramatic enough for society columns, but Enid noticed every part of it. By late July, Ernest Burdett remained dismissed, and the trustees had placed the recovered records with solicitors pursuing repayment through civil channels. His professional standing had collapsed. Among the men who once trusted him with private accounts, Lady Pauline Kenyon had issued the retraction she owed Enid and withdrawn from the London season soon afterward. She no longer managed Sackville household announcements, family financial discussions, or social decisions made in Samuel's name. Enid did not celebrate Pauline's retreat. She simply enjoyed the quiet left behind by it. One warm afternoon, Samuel arrived at Enid's London residence, with no portfolio beneath his arm. Mrs. Vale admitted him to the drawing room and settled near the far window with her embroidery. Enid was seated at a writing table reviewing a warehouse lease. Samuel stopped just inside the room. You are working. A dangerous condition, I know. Should I return later? Enid looked at him over the page. That depends. Have you brought figures? No. Contracts? No. A memorandum? Not even one. She placed the lease aside. Then you may stay. Samuel smiled and crossed the room. He did not sit until she indicated the chair opposite hers. That small courtesy had once been invisible to her. Now it pleased her because she knew it was chosen, not automatic. I have a question, he said. That has improved your life considerably. It has also made me nervous with remarkable consistency. Then ask before courage deserts you. Samuel reached into his. coat and withdrew a small velvet ring box. Enid stared at it, then at him. "No papers?" she asked. "None." "No trustees waiting in another room?" "None." "No estate emergency?" "There's absolutely none." He opened the box. The ring was elegant rather than ostentatious. A clear stone set with 2 smaller diamonds. Samuel did not rise or kneel theatrically. He simply looked at her with an honesty that made ceremony unnecessary. "Enid, I asked you once to enter a future I had already defined for you. I will not do that again." His voice was steady, but she saw the tension in his hand. "I know what I hope for. I know what I want, but the choice is yours." Enid's throat tightened. Samuel continued, "Will you marry me?" She let him wait for several heartbeats, not from cruelty, but because this answer deserved to be fully hers. Then she smiled. Yes. The relief in his face was immediate and almost boyish. "Yes. Do not make me repeat myself merely because you like hearing it." "I like hearing it very much." He held out the ring but paused. "May I?" Enid offered her left hand. "You may." Samuel slid the ring onto her finger, and then, because the moment belonged to them rather than society, lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles lightly. Enid turned her hand and caught his fingers before he could withdraw. "I love you," she said. His expression softened. "I love you too." Mrs. Vale's needle continued moving at the far window with remarkable concentration. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations, but not surrender. Enid retained her own solicitor. The new marriage settlement protected her existing property interests, preserved the independent structure of Chetwynd and Company, and gave Samuel no automatic authority over commercial votes he had not earned through separate agreement. When Mr. Sloane read the provisions aloud, Samuel listened without objection. At one clause, he even looked toward Enid and said, "Make that protection stronger if it can be." Mr. Sloane removed his spectacles. "Your Grace, most prospective husbands ask me to simplify these matters. Most prospective husbands have not learned my particular lesson." Enid's mouth curved. "Do not become proud of improvement. I am trying to remain humbly insufferable." The banns were called in proper course. Invitations were issued without spectacle. Samuel refused every suggestion that the wedding should become a demonstration to London, and Enid was grateful. She had already been vindicated before witnesses. She did not need to be paraded as proof of anyone's moral reform. They married before family, close friends, trustees who had stood by the truth, and several people from Chetwynd and Company whom Enid considered part of the life Samuel was joining rather than replacing. When the clergyman completed the vows, Samuel did not look relieved to have secured her. He looked astonished to have been chosen. That difference stayed with Enid throughout the day. By evening, they had reached Havisham Park after the carriage journey into Surrey. The estate lay quiet beneath the fading midsummer light, its lawns pale beyond the windows, and the last wedding guests dispersed to their rooms. Enid had been there before in Company, but never as the Duchess of Norchester. The title felt strange when servants used it. Samuel noticed her expression after the third formal address. "You dislike it?" "No, I am only reminding myself that it does not contain me." "Good." He offered his hand. "Would you walk with me?" Enid placed her hand in his. "Yes." They crossed the gallery and entered the conservatory, where late light filtered through the glass and settled across lemon trees, ferns, and climbing jasmine. No musicians followed them. No family waited behind a door. For the first time that day, there was only quiet. Samuel kept her hand in his, but did not lead her toward any prepared arrangement. "I thought you might want a moment without people calling you, Your Grace." You may call me Enid." I had hoped for that privilege. She looked at him. "You already had it." "I know. I still do not take it lightly." They stopped beside an open glass door overlooking the garden. Enid reached into the small pocket hidden in the folds of her gown and withdrew the brass compass her father had given her years before. The case was worn smooth at the edge, unchanged by titles, scandal, vindication, or marriage. She opened it in her palm. Samuel recognized it immediately. Beneath the compass face, the engraving remained as it always had. "Choose your course." Samuel looked from the words to her. Which course? Months earlier, Enid would have answered alone because she had needed to prove that the direction belonged to her. Now freedom felt different. It no longer required solitude. She placed the open compass between their joined hands. Ours. Samuel's fingers tightened gently around hers. "Only if you keep telling me when I am walking the wrong way." "I fully intend to." That is reassuring and terrifying. A healthy marriage should contain both. He laughed softly. Then his expression changed, warmth settling into something deeper. Enid lifted one eyebrow. "You are asking now? Especially now?" She stepped closer. "Yes." Samuel kissed her with the same care he had shown in the conservatory at Havisham House weeks earlier, but there was no uncertainty left in it. Enid returned the kiss freely, one hand rising to his cheek, while the other remained wrapped around the compass with his. When they parted, she rested against him for a quiet moment and felt his arm settle around her, not as restraint, but as welcome. Beyond the glass, evening gathered over Havisham Park. Inside, the compass rested safely between their joined hands. Samuel had once believed security meant deciding the future before feeling could interfere. Enid had once feared that love would always ask her to surrender some part of herself in exchange for belonging. They had both been wrong. The future was not a contract already written. It was a direction chosen again and again. Together, they stepped out of the conservatory and walked toward it.